for those who have not been to Lanhydrock before, my standard guided tour address goes something like this. This is Lanhydrock House, the ancestral home of the Robarts family. Situated on the edge of Bodmin Moor in Cornwall, the 1,000-acre estate, now owned by the National Trust, is some 25 miles east of Truro. By far the most impressive internal space is the Jacobean Gallery, a 35-metre-long chamber carrying one of the most accomplished plasterwork ceilings in the south of England. The decorative cartouches on the barrel-vaulted ceiling depict stories from the Book of Genesis, very fitting for a puritanical and parliamentarian family who expediently changed sides during the interregnum. During the Restoration, John Robarts was a prominent voice in the theological debate of the day. His scholarly collection of books amounted to nearly 3,000, including 28 volumes of incunabula, are displayed in this room, and you can just see them there on the side wall. Here is a portrait of Sir Richard Roberts, not in our collection, and rather ambitiously, in my opinion, attributed to Van Dyck by a very keen owner who wants to sell it to us. Roberts acquired the estate in 1620. He was a man of great ambition, being fined £10,000 by the Crown for dubious money-lending deals. He changed his name to Robarts to give himself some Norman ancestry. He faked his own family pedigree, and he bought a baronial title for £12,000 in 1624. So who says cash for honours is not a new thing? To your right is Richard's son, John Robarts, by Kneller. Born in 1606, he later became the first Earl of Radnor, a title first created in 1679. Fittingly, hanging either side of John are portraits of his two wives. Lucy, the youngest daughter of the Earl of Warwick, was a staunch Puritan like her husband. She had 5 children and died in 1648. His second wife, Letitia, here by Peter Lely, was described by one contemporary as flirtatious. She had an affair with the Duke of York and had 14 children. Her husband, 30 years her senior, perhaps understandably, was said by Count Grammond to be obsessed with her to the point of distraction. Because John's eldest son predeceased him, the title passed to his grandson, Charles Bodville Robarts, who contemporaries described as a rascal and a lavish curio. His inheritance split the family and resulted in litigation between generations. Charles became embroiled in a homosexuality scandal, but later married Elizabeth Cutler, from whose father he conveniently inherited a small fortune and a modest property in Cambridgeshire called Wimpole Hall. He employed the Van der Velts, Louis Laguerre, Christopher Wren, and Charles Bridgman on his cultural aspirations. Not surprisingly, it ruined him. The third Earl went on a prolonged grand tour in 1724, eventually dying in Paris in 1741. In this grand tour portrait, he looks suspiciously like a Jacobite, although no evidence survives to suggest that he either was a Catholic sympathiser or supporter of the Stuart line. The fourth Earl, another John, was a great patron of Samuel Scott, Francis Hayman, and Peter Tillemans. He owned a Canaletto, now owned by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and was a close personal friend to George Frederick Handel. While the first Earl had 19 children in total, the second Earl had none, and the third and fourth Earls never married, this rendered the title extinct in 1757. It is here that the Hunt family inherited. First, George Hunt, on the left here, the great-great-grandson of the first Earl, here in the uniform of the Cheshire Yeomanry, and then his niece, Anna Maria, who married Charles Agar, the youngest son of the Irish Viscount Clifton, in 1804. And a curious failure of the male Agar line saw the family inherit the Clifton title in 1899. Anna Maria, here on the right, by George Romney, inherited a cash-poor but mineral-rich landed estate, which she aspired to turn around financially for her only surviving son, Thomas James Agar, who took on the ancestral name of Robarts in 1822. So at this point in the tour, I would normally take a breather and ask if everything was clear and if there are any questions, to which the normal learned responses might be, are there any ghosts in the house? Or, honestly, as someone said to me not all that long ago, when there's no one around, you walk around the house naked. So perhaps not dwell on questions for too long at this point. Now the scene is set, the real purpose of this talk is to consider our collection of some 7,000 family photographs. In the main, our collection comprises of family and extended family portraiture, often recording notable events such as coming of age, military service, and holidays and travel. Dates largely follow the zenith of the Agar Robarts family fortunes, from their mid-Victorian rise in prosperity as influential MPs and benevolent local dignitaries, through to the large fashionable early Edwardian household, an epoch cut short by the First World War. The spontaneous and more chaotic informality of the later period is marked by, in contrast to the formalism of the former. Typical of many collections, our photographs have been painstakingly set into albums, but others are loose, and very few sitters or subjects have been identified by their contemporaries. It would appear that the collection survived the devastating fire of 1881, whether complete or in part, we cannot tell. The decline of the family fortunes after 1918, with only 2 of the children marrying and only 1 of them having a family of their own, saw a decline in the interest of photographic portraiture, presumably having less consequence for a rapidly diminishing lineage. The Agar Robarts family appeared to embrace the developing medium of photography early on, a point suggested by the fact that an image of Thomas James's young son was captured on card in about 1856, but not in paint. This carte de feast of Thomas Charles Agar Robarts on the left comes from the Penzance studio of Robert H. Preston, an early pioneer of the art in Cornwall, who, although born in Gloucestershire, relocated to the emerging seaside town where he was based for some 50 years and later asserted himself as photographer to the Prince and Princess of Wales. In the centre is one of a large set of studio images of the teenage Thomas Charles Agar Robarts from 1860, taken by Camille Léon Louis Sylvie, a French photographer working from Porchester Terrace in Bayswater. Sylvie, an elected member of the Photographic Society, counted royalty amongst his patrons, and his studio daybooks survive here in the National Portrait Gallery. He returned to France in 1868, claiming that his nervous system had been damaged by potassium cyanide from the darkroom. On the right is Thomas Charles's engagement picture with his bride-to-be Mary Dickinson from King Weston in Somerset, taken by another high society photographer, Alexandro Bassano, at his old Bond Street studio. No images of the wedding survive. Thomas Charles's father, Thomas James Agar Robarts, and mother Juliana appeared more reticent to sit for a photographer. Having been painted by George Richmond in 1869 and 1876 respectively, Lady Robarts sat for her first series of cabinet-style cards in the early 1860s. Not surprisingly, they are highly posed and repetitive in their composition, reminiscent of her painted sittings. His lordship eventually sat for a London-based photographer, F.R. Window, in 1878, 4 years before his death. For such a devoted couple, it is perhaps curious as to why they do not appear in any photograph together. Indeed, only one image survives of mother and son, an image that shows some confidence in the photographer leaving his studio and marks the completion of the new formal garden at Lanhydrock, which dates to between 1858 and 1860. The 1651 gatehouse is used there in the backdrop. Both Lady Robartses presided over well-ordered photograph albums, which held private records of their respected over-groomed and well-ordered families. Such dedication shows a sensitivity that is perhaps less noticeable in their husbands. Thomas Charles Agar Robarts married Mary Dickinson in 1878, and together they had 10 children. Like any emerging family, capturing trinkets of the offspring was a popular pastime. For this generation, the parents chose photography on paper, glass, and ceramic, alongside works in oils, watercolour, and pastels. There are hundreds of formal photographs of the children in our collection, but less so the parents. It would appear to be the duty of the new Lady Robarts to be the family archivist and record keeper, using a whole range of photographic studios, many located at seaside locations, to take images of whoever was on holiday at the time. Here we have a formal sitting of 3 boys and their father taken at Ramsgate, and a more impulsive picture of the governess with the children at Dieppe. It is of note that several of the studio painted portraits as well were done whilst on holiday. 2 casual observations are: first, only 1 picture survives of all 9 children in one sitting, a reminder perhaps that it was difficult to get all the family in one place at one time once schooling had started. This image on the left was taken by Alexander Bassano in 1896, most likely at his Brighton studio. And another observation relates to John Radnor Agar Robarts, who was born in poor health in June 1894. This photograph was taken within weeks alongside his more healthy siblings. The photo was taken by Window and Grove of Baker Street. It would seem that the urgency of ill health prompted the recording of a new baby into the family, whilst the number of this image in the collection remind us that such cards were distributed as a celebration of birth, but probably not in this case because John Radnor died soon after. The rise in popularity of the portable camera and celluloid film in the 1890s came at a fitting time, as the most enduring and charming images in our collection show the children and young adults pursuing their leisure time in activities such as fancy dress parties, cricket, the shoot, equestrian, and tennis. I'm spoilt for choice on what to show, really, to show this element of what I call goofing around, as there are so many to choose from. So here are a selected few that show the family interests in cycling, music, pets, and perhaps more unexpectedly for what's perceived to be a relatively dull family, aeronautical pursuits. The beauty of these images is how they portray the human and intimate side of family relations. I would just like to add a story at this stage, really, about how we research our pictures. In 2002, a volunteer who was archiving boxes of miscellaneous items brought me a camera. Her concern was that when you shook the camera, it rattled. My advice clearly was don't shake the camera. But on closer investigation, the reason for the rattle was that a film was still in the camera housing. Having some past experience of developing film, I took the camera into a nearby airing cupboard and opened the back, only to see a still exposed film across the shutter housing. Having wound it back into the cartridge, I put the film in a drawer and forgot about it. About a year later, I thought it might be a sensible idea to send it to a laboratory for developing, and some weeks later, a dozen 3x3 negatives were returned to me, which I promptly got printed. These are some of the amazing images that came out of that camera. The children cycling in the garden, an open coach ride through the ornamental landscape with Nanny or the governess, no doubt ending in a picnic, and a proud member of the gardening staff in what looks like our kitchen garden. Furthermore, there were images of beloved pets pictured in the formal gardens and more formal sittings of staff and their family lined up in their Sunday best outside their houses. I can only imagine what these families thought when the gentry arrived with their camera, requesting that they all dress up and sit for a formal image. The images are from 1896 and most likely were taken by the eldest of the Victorian children, Tommy Agar Robarts, who was not in any of the pictures himself. they are a remarkable survival, so much so that they secured airtime on the national BBC News. Painted portraits were not forgotten at this time. However, as one century ended and a new one begun, the family moved away from the more pedestrian, old-school artists like Edwin Long, Walter Ulis and Henry Weigel, who were popular with the parents, and instead drew on the services of an emerging generation of aesthetic-style portraitists such as Anna Lee Merritt and Richard Jack. Richard Jack later painted this image of Tommy Agar Robarts that now hangs on our oak stairs, and also painted a picture of his twin sister, Everilda. These pictures hung in the old Jacobean Gallery, now a large reception room, where photography was never going to compete with the large canvases of the 17th, 18th and 19th century forebears. Tommy Agar Robarts MP was undoubtedly the most engaging member of the family, and his time at public school, his many sporting achievements, and his interest in political successes in his military career sees him as the most popular sitter and subject for early 20th century photographic portraits. During his Cornish political campaigns, we see the Liberal luminaries of the day visiting Lanhydrock. Pictured here on the left is Herbert Asquith, when he visited Lanhydrock in 1906, and in contrast to the formality of his Liberal peers, Tommy leans nonchalantly against the porch in his grey suit and spats. He was indeed an Edwardian playboy, and extremely popular with the electorate and the political elite. He was part of the de Rothschild set and had a great interest in sailing and the turf, and this meant his image was popular with the press. This picture on the right shows him with his closest political ally, Lord Rosebery, who visited Lanhydrock in 1906. The visit changed the course of political history when, during a rally in Bodmin, Rosebery said to the assembled crowd that he could not serve under the banner, a seemingly innocent reference to Home Rule, yet taken by the popular press to mean disloyalty to the leader, Campbell Bannerman. The Tories saw a split, called an election, and the Liberals were returned with a 2/3 majority. It was this election that saw Tommy elected to Parliament for the first time, a position that lasted some 8 weeks when he was disqualified for electoral fraud. Tommy's electioneering is well represented in the photographic collection, particularly in formal sittings held for official pamphlets and flyers. Less formal images, however, are far more engaging. These two postcard images show Tommy at the top there on a political rally held in the gardens at Lanhydrock, where Tommy can just about be made out lecturing from the rostrum. As the attentive crowd were fed and watered, the authorities saw this as electoral treating, which, to be fair, did not help his cause a great deal. The other image shows Tommy on civic duty by launching the St. Column hurling match. Tragically, he died 4 years later from wounds received at the Battle of Lewes. I called this paper Princes to Paupers to express the range of subjects shown throughout the collection. I'd be failing in my duty if I did not show you both. So here on the right is a group image from 1903 taken at Restormal Castle, which shows the Prince and Princess of Wales and Lord and Lady Robarts and some of their family. The Agar Robarts family were known and admired for their many acts of benevolence, one of which was the endowment of an orphanage at the top of the park. So amongst our collection, we have various albums dedicated to pictures of orphans from the care of the family. And we have about 5 or 6 of those albums in our collection. Some of these orphans were taken into service and hired alongside hired staff, which is another strong thread of the collection. Pictured here is the long-serving head gardener, Joseph Bray, one of the many nannies, Sarah Ann Code, and the Jane family, who are incidentally posing outside the house that I live in now. I'd like to mention briefly how we care for and manage and disseminate this large collection. When I arrived at Lanhydrock in 1999, the photographic collection was largely uncatalogued and needed better care. Tapping into the richness of this collection seemed an obvious priority. So, led by a small team of dedicated volunteers and with support from the regional conservators and national specialists, we trained up the volunteers in conservation, in cleaning techniques, undertook small repairs on the albums, made bespoke boxes for their storage, and considered things like environmental control, fire salvage, and packing in storage. The team were eager to further their expertise and did some regional courses, and even went to the Royal Photographic Society in Bath to extend their education. Another volunteer painstakingly researched the images, trying to determine the sitters, the subjects, the locations, and the events contained within the images. His catalogue went on to inform the catalogue that we now have online. In more recent years, our collection has been fully digitalised and can be viewed in full online at National Trust Collections Online. Our 7,000 images can be seen by all, which in itself has generated a huge amount of interest from visitors, researchers, all of which feeds into our knowledge and education of the whole collection. However, what complemented this project is another that runs alongside it. Some 6 years ago, we set up an agreement with the County Record Office in Truro, whereby uncatalogued family papers were brought back to the house to be catalogued by a team of 30 volunteer archivists. This project's now part of our daily operation, and from this project, we have discovered a huge amount of detail from the papers about family outings and holidays and political campaigning and official duties, many of which ties with the collection. It's these connections that allow us to tell our story in a much more structured and informed way through our interpretation, presentation, and animation. A good example of this might be this presentation casket, shown here on the right of HMS Lion, that was launched by Viscountess Clifton in 1911. She herself was a belated replacement for the King, who died the previous month. The photograph on the right shows the garden party that was held at Lanhydrock for the workmen and their families who built the mighty battlecruiser. The archives provide us with the launching invitation, and the letters show us how much interest Viscountess Clifton took in the ship once it was in active service. And one final piece of information on this was that through looking through the Southwest Television Archive, we actually found a piece of moving film, that showed the Viscountess launching the ship at Devon, and that can actually be seen on YouTube now. This point is perhaps best expressed by a visitor who perhaps should remain anonymous, but is a well-respected author and associate of the Royal Photographic Society, who was delighted to see life-size photographs from the collection printed on Fomex in the room layouts. And she wrote to us and said, "Not long ago, I was at Lanhydrock," which she said, incidentally, was one of her favourite properties. Just thought I'd throw that in. And the use of photography at the property is fantastic, with life-size images of the family adding scale and sense of family life and ownership to the room layouts. To conclude, the Lanhydrock collection is a fabulous resource, something everyone can explore, compare, research and contrast on our website. However, it's fair to say that our collection is not all Indigenous. Indeed, since acquisition in 1954, we have acquired a whole host of objects to the collection, including photographs, so it's not always clear what has provenance and what hasn't, and that's something we've worked on very hard through our research. I'd like to leave you with this last item. This album has no provenance to the collection or to the Agar Robarts family, but was probably acquired in the 1970s at auction when the property opened more rooms to visitors. It once belonged to Colonel Charles Liddon Cox and dates to the second half of the 1850s. Cox was a keen amateur photographer who took images of his own travels at home and abroad, took images of his extended family, of southwest quarries, and his own building projects. And here we can see some of the images from that album, which is the second Earl Morley from Saltram on the left-hand side there, a local from Tangier in the middle, and a picture of an apparently affluent man stopping the well-meaning gardener at Exeter Cathedral from manicuring the lawn. Lyndon Cox's skill is in the composition of his images. Throughout the album, he connects people with place, as seen in these images of two reclining sitters in front of Ashton Hall and the staff shown at the front door of Cote Hill in Cornwall. This album is an absolute gem and really captures the spirit of early photography. I leave you with these Welsh ladies and a gentleman sitting in the cloister at Gloucester Cathedral just passing the time. Thank you very much.